The judge's gavel strikes the dark wooden bench, and the sound echoes in my bones like the ghost of all the years I've lived in silence. Here I am, Eleanor Vance, 67 years old, sitting in this cold courtroom with my wrinkled hands clutching a yellow envelope I've kept for 13 years. My heart pounds so hard I'm afraid everyone in the room can hear it. Across from me is my daughter, Valerie. She sits perfectly postured in an elegant charcoal suit, her manicured fingers resting on the table. Beside her, her lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Mark Sullivan, reviews papers with the cool confidence of someone who believes he owns the truth. Valerie's eyes, my own eyes, 30 years younger, burn with a rage I don't understand. Or perhaps I understand it all too well. Your Honor, Valerie says, her voice trembling with a performance of wounded dignity. My mother has kept my children from me for 13 years without my consent. What she calls raising them, the law calls parental kidnapping. I never authorized her to take them. She exploited a moment of crisis and never let them go. The word kidnapping pierces the stuffy air and lodges deep in my chest, right beside all the other mother wounds that never healed. I don't look at her. Instead, I turn slightly in my chair. In the third row sit my 3 grandchildren. My 3 grandchildren. Arthur, 20, tall and solemn, his jaw tight. Emily, 18, her face pale, clutching a tissue she hasn't used. Andrea, 16, hugging herself, looking at her mother as if she's a stranger who's wandered into a private grief. They are the reason I breathe. They are also the reason we are here. Judge Theodore Mason, a man with kind eyes worn weary by a lifetime of other people's tragedies, peers at me over his glasses. Mrs. Vance, he says, his voice quieter than Valerie's, but carrying the full weight of the law. These are grave allegations. What do you have to say? My fingers tighten on the envelope. It's ordinary, the kind you buy in a packet of 50 at the drugstore. But inside it holds the weight of a decade. Inside are the proofs of a truth I have sheltered like a fragile, wounded bird. A truth that is about to take flight and scorch everything in its path. Your Honor, I begin, and my voice surprises me. It is not the shaky whisper of a scared old woman. It is low, clear, and anchored in years of reading bedtime stories, soothing nightmares, and saying, I'm here. I did not kidnap anyone. I simply opened my door one afternoon and found 3 children who had been left there. I simply did what any grandmother would do. I kept them safe. I kept them fed. I kept them loved. That's a lie. Valerie is on her feet, her composure cracking. I was ill. I had severe postpartum depression that spiraled into a crisis. I needed temporary help, not a lifetime of alienation. Her lawyer places a calming hand on her arm. Your Honor, my client was hospitalized following a mental health crisis. She was vulnerable. Mrs. Vance used that vulnerability to establish herself as the primary, and only parental figure, systematically cutting off contact. I feel the courtroom tilt. The spectators, a handful of reporters, a few court officers, a social worker, lean in. The narrative is clean, modern. The fragile young mother, the overbearing, opportunistic grandmother. It's a story that makes sense on paper. But I know the truth. I have lived it in the marrow of my bones. In the pre-dawn dark of countless mornings, in the steam of chicken soup for fevers, in the quiet triumph of finished homework, in the hollow ache of a child crying for a mother who would not come. Mrs. Vance, Judge Mason says, and there's a hint of compassion there, which almost breaks me. I understand that caring for 3 young children alone must have been an immense burden. But if the biological mother is now stable and seeking to rebuild that relationship, the law must consider her rights. With all due respect, Your Honor, I interrupt, and the force in my voice makes even Sullivan look up from his notes. There are things this court needs to know before it decides what rights we are discussing. I lift the yellow envelope. It's not a dramatic gesture, but I see Valerie's eyes lock onto it, widening with something raw and unmistakable. Fear. Here, I say, holding it aloft, is the context. Here is what really happened 13 years ago. And here, I add, my gaze shifting back to my daughter, is the reason she is in this courtroom today. And it has nothing to do with maternal love. Valerie pales. Mom, she whispers, the words slipping out before she can stop it. It's the first time she's called me that in over a decade. Please. Don't do this. Do what, Valerie? I ask, my voice terribly soft. Tell the truth. Attorney Sullivan clears his throat. Your Honor, this is a blatant attempt to distract from the central issue. Documents from the distant past do not negate my client's fundamental legal rights as their mother. On the contrary, I say, my eyes never leaving my daughter's. These documents explain precisely why we are here today. They explain why, after 13 years of utter silence, no calls on birthdays, no financial support, not a single Christmas card, my daughter has suddenly arrived with an expensive lawyer. It's not because she misses them. It's because she needs something. The silence in the room becomes a physical thing, thick and charged. I can hear the hum of the fluorescent lights, the rustle of Sullivan's suit as he shifts, the shaky exhale from Emily behind me. Judge Mason studies me, his tired eyes now alert and probing. Mrs. Vance, are you suggesting there is an ulterior motive behind this custody petition? I'm not suggesting, Your Honor. I am stating it as a fact. I finally look away from Valerie and meet the judge's gaze. And it is all documented here. Mom, Valerie pleads again, a desperate whisper. I've had 13 years to think, Valerie, I reply, my voice echoing in the hushed room. 13 years of waiting for a phone call that never came. 13 years of being the only one in the audience at school plays. 13 years of explaining your absence with a lie I hoped would hurt them less than the truth. Judge Mason taps his gavel once, lightly. Mrs. Vance, are you prepared to enter these documents into evidence? I look down at the envelope. It contains the letters Valerie sent in the first year, not to the children but to me. It contains the cancelled checks from the single pathetic support payment she attempted, then stopped. It contains photographs. And it contains one other thing. Something even the children don't know I have. Something that arrived in my mailbox 6 weeks ago, like a snake slithering out of the past. Yes, Your Honor, I say, my voice steady. I am. Very well, the judge says, making a note. But before we examine new evidence, I need to understand the history. In your own words, Mrs. Vance, tell this court what happened 13 years ago. I close my eyes for a moment. The sterile scent of the courtroom fades, replaced by the memory of rain and damp wool. I am back in my small, warm kitchen on a Tuesday that shattered my world. It was a cold, rainy October afternoon, I begin, and the room falls away. I was making chamomile tea. My arthritis was bad that day. The phone hadn't rung. The house was quiet. I open my eyes and see the judge, the lawyers, the spectators, all gone. I only see the past. And then there was a knock on the door. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, as if Arthur's words had sucked all the sound from the world. I watched my grandson, this young man I had raised from a scared, hungry boy of 7, and my heart swelled with a fierce, aching pride. He had spoken his truth. He had looked at the ghost of his mother and called her by her name. Valerie was no longer crying. She sat perfectly still, her face a mask of shock, as if Arthur had physically struck her. Her lawyer, Mark Sullivan, had stopped taking notes. He was simply staring at his client, his professional composure fractured by the raw, ugly reality spilling out. Judge Mason let the silence hold for a long moment, a space for Arthur's words to settle into the record, into everyone's conscience. Thank you, Arthur, the judge finally said, his voice unusually gentle. You may step down. He turned his gaze to Emily. Emily Vance, please approach. Emily stood. At 18, she was all long limbs and quiet intensity, the girl who had stopped speaking for a month after her mother left and had found her voice again in poetry. She walked to the witness stand, her posture straight, but I could see the tremor in her hands as she placed them on the wooden rail. Emily, Judge Mason said, I know this is incredibly difficult. Can you tell the court about your childhood? About living with your grandmother? Emily looked directly at me, and the love in her gaze was a tangible warmth in the cold room. My grandmother, she began, her voice soft but unwavering, is the reason I know what safety feels like. 4 years after we arrived at her door, I had nightmares. I'd wake up screaming, sure we were back in that dark apartment, hungry and waiting for a door that never opened. Grandma Eleanor would come in, every time. She'd sit on the edge of my bed, stroke my hair, and tell me stories until I fell asleep. She never acted like it was a burden. She made me feel like my fear was the most important thing in the world. She turned her eyes to the judge. She worked a day job at a clinic and cleaned offices at night. I remember helping her fold uniforms, the smell of bleach on her hands. But she was always at the kitchen table for homework. She taught me that a family isn't about who gave birth to you. It's about who shows up, who stays. Valerie let out a small, choked sound. Emily's gaze flicked to her, and for the first time, I saw a flash of the old, buried anger in my granddaughter's eyes. And your mother's return, the judge prompted. Emily took a deep breath. When she showed up 2 months ago with that man, she said, nodding toward Sullivan, it didn't feel like a homecoming. It felt like an invasion. She didn't ask about my life. She didn't know I'd won the state poetry prize. She didn't know Arthur got into engineering school. She asked about the situation and legal standing. Emily's voice hardened. She asked if we'd gotten any official paperwork about an inheritance. That was her second question. A collective intake of breath came from the spectators. Sullivan buried his face in his hands for a second. Your Honor, Emily continued, her voice trembling now with conviction, not fear. I don't want to live with a stranger who sees me as a bank account. My home is with my grandmother. My mother is the woman who raised me. She stepped down, her composure cracking only as she passed me, reaching out to squeeze my shoulder before returning to her seat, where Andrea immediately wrapped an arm around her. Andrea Vance, the judge said. Would you like to speak? My youngest granddaughter, just 16, stood up. She was still hugging herself, but her chin was set with a stubbornness I knew all too well. She didn't go to the stand. She stood right where she was, in the third row, and addressed the judge directly. Your Honor, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. I don't really remember her. The woman in the suit. I have a memory. It's more of a feeling. Of being scared and cold. And then a feeling of warm hands and soup and my grandma singing. That's my first real memory. She looked at Valerie, her eyes wide and painfully honest. You're like a character in a story to me. A sad story Grandma tried to make sound less sad. I don't hate you. But you're not my mom. You gave up that title 13 years ago. You don't get to claim it now just because there's money. The brutal, unvarnished truth from the mouth of a child. The final nail in the coffin of Valerie's case. The judge nodded slowly, his face grave. He looked at me. Mrs. Vance, you mentioned a final document. Given the testimony we've just heard, I believe it's time to see it. All eyes returned to me and the yellow envelope, now almost empty. My fingers found the last piece of paper, folded into a tight, small square. I unfolded it carefully. It wasn't a letter. It was a form. Your Honor, I said, my voice hoarse with emotion. This is a notarized document I had drawn up 6 years ago, when Arthur turned 14. It was witnessed by my sister, Elma Jensen, and by our family pastor. I handed it to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. It is a formal, irrevocable designation, I explained as he read, naming me, Eleanor Vance, as the sole guardian and trustee for Arthur, Emily, and Andrea until they reach the age of 25. It includes a clause that any attempt to challenge this designation by their biological mother, Valerie Vance, would automatically trigger the release of all the documents in this envelope, the photos, the letters, to the court, and would result in the immediate and permanent forfeiture of any claim she might have to their persons or their assets. I looked at Valerie, whose face was now as white as the paper in the judge's hands. I had it drawn up, Your Honor, not out of malice, but out of fear. A fear that one day, the past would come knocking not for love, but for something else. I never wanted to use it. I hoped it would just sit in this envelope forever, a silent guardian. But she made me take it out. Judge Mason finished reading. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. The room waited. Ms. Vance, he said, addressing Valerie directly for the first time. Your children, intelligent, articulate, courageous young adults, have just testified that they see you as a stranger who has returned for financial gain. Their grandmother has presented contemporaneous evidence that you willingly abandoned them to start a new family, and that you explicitly released your claim to them in writing. She has further presented evidence that your renewed interest coincides precisely with the prospect of an inheritance. He leaned forward, his voice dropping but losing none of its power. This court deals in the best interests of children, not the interests of adults who rediscover their parenthood when it becomes financially convenient. Arthur, Emily, and Andrea are not children in need of a home. They have a home. They have a parent. That parent is Eleanor Vance. He picked up his gavel. Petition for custody is denied. Permanent legal guardianship is affirmed with Eleanor Vance. Furthermore, based on the evidence of attempted fraud upon the court and exploitation of the legal process, I am issuing a restraining order barring Valerie Vance from contacting the minors or Mrs. Vance for a period of 5 years, unless initiated by the children themselves after they reach the age of majority. Bang. The gavel fell. The sound was not an echo of the past. It was a door closing. A door she had opened 13 years ago, finally shut for good. Valerie made no sound. She simply stared blankly ahead, as if the verdict had hollowed her out. Sullivan began gathering his papers, his face grim. I didn't look at them. I turned to my grandchildren. Arthur was crying openly now, tears of relief streaking his face. Emily was smiling through her own tears, a radiant, fierce smile. Andrea just ran to me, burying her face in my shoulder. Grandma, she whispered. I'm here, I whispered back, the same words I'd said 1,000 times. The only words that ever really mattered. I'm always here. The yellow envelope lay empty on the table. It had served its purpose. The truth, once a burden I carried alone, was now a shield that would protect them. My vigil was over. Our life, the real one, the one we had built together, could finally begin without the shadow of that knock on the door. The surprise in the room is palpable. Even my grandchildren stare at me, shocked. I hadn't told them about the call. Your Honor, I continue, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Last Tuesday, my phone rang. The number was blocked. When I answered, it was Valerie. Valerie's sobs have subsided into a horrified silence. She knows what comes next. She didn't ask about the children's health, I say, my gaze never leaving hers. She didn't ask how they'd been. Her first words were, Mom, we need to talk about this inheritance situation. We can work something out that benefits everyone. A gasp ripples through the courtroom. Arthur closes his eyes, a pained expression on his face. She proposed a deal, I continue, pulling my phone from my purse. With the investigator's help, I recorded the call. I believe it's admissible, given the circumstances. I had checked with my own, quietly retained lawyer before coming today. It was a single-party consent state. The judge nods grimly. Play it. I press a button. The tinny digital sound of Valerie's voice, stripped of its courtroom tears and filled with a cold, wheedling urgency, fills the silent room. Look, Mom, let's be practical. The kids are almost adults. That money from Uncle Arthur, it's just sitting there. Javier and I, we're in a tight spot. If you just step aside for a little while, let the court give me custody, just on paper, we can access that trust. We'd take care of everything. We could even give you a cut for your troubles over the years. Think of it as back pay for babysitting. I pause the recording. The word babysitting hangs in the air, more vile than any curse. Your Honor, I say quietly, I raised her children for 13 years. I sacrificed my health, my retirement, my peace. To her, it was babysitting. A service with a price tag attached to an inheritance. Judge Theodore Mason does not look at Valerie. He stares at the papers before him, his face a stone mask of judicial impartiality, but the tight line of his jaw betrays his disgust. Mrs. Vance, he says after a long moment, his voice echoing with finality. You have presented to this court a signed, notarized renunciation of parental rights. You have presented evidence of abandonment, of neglect prior to that abandonment, and of a clear, financially motivated attempt to defraud both these children and this court. The testimony of the children themselves is unequivocal. They see you not as a mother returned, but as a threat to the only stability they have ever known. He turns to Valerie's lawyer. Mr. Sullivan, does your client have any response to these allegations that does not involve her mental state 13 years ago, a state which, according to her own signed document, she was lucid enough to formalize? Mark Sullivan looks defeated. He whispers to Valerie, who shakes her head violently, then buries her face in her hands. No, Your Honor, Sullivan says quietly. The defense rests. The judge nods. He takes a deep breath, assembling his words. The petition for custody is denied. Permanently. The voluntary renunciation of parental rights dated October 15, 2011, is recognized as valid and binding. Legal guardianship remains irrevocably with Eleanor Vance. Bang. The first strike of the gavel is like a bolt of justice. Furthermore, due to the evidence of attempted fraud and exploitation, I am issuing a permanent restraining order barring Valerie Vance from any contact with Arthur, Emily, or Andrea Vance until such time as they, as adults, choose to initiate it. Any attempt to contact them or Mrs. Vance will be considered a violation. Bang. Finally, I am referring the evidence of attempted financial fraud regarding the inheritance to the District Attorney's Office for potential investigation. Bang. It is over. The sound of the gavel is not an echo this time. It is a period. The end of a sentence 13 years long. Valerie is helped from the courtroom by her ashen-faced lawyer, not looking back. The specter is gone. I don't watch her leave. I turn to my grandchildren. We meet in the center of the courtroom, a tight, trembling circle of 4. Arthur wraps his long arms around us all. Emily is crying silent tears of relief into my shoulder. Andrea, my fierce girl, holds me so tight I can barely breathe. It's over, I whisper into their hair, the words I've waited a lifetime to say with certainty. You're safe. You're home. We walk out of the courthouse together, into the weak afternoon sun. The yellow envelope is empty, left behind on the evidence table. Its purpose is served. Its truth has set us free. We don't speak on the drive home. The silence is comfortable, full of a shared exhaustion and a dawning peace. That evening, as I'm washing the dinner dishes, Arthur comes into the kitchen. He leans against the counter, watching me. Grandma, he says. That document. The renunciation. Did you always have it? I dry my hands slowly. Yes, honey. I found it in that box the landlady gave me, about a year after you came to live with me. Then why? His voice breaks. Why did you go through all of this? The court years ago, the struggle. If you had that, you could have ended it. I turn and look at my grandson, this man-child with the weight of too much history in his eyes. Because it was a weapon, Arthur. And I never wanted to use a weapon against your mother. I kept it as a shield, for absolute worst-case scenario. I always hoped, foolishly, maybe, that she would come back for the right reasons. That she would become someone worthy of you. I didn't want a piece of paper to be the only thing standing between her and you. I wanted it to be her own choices. He nods, understanding. And today, her choices made you use it. Her choices left me no other way to protect you, I say softly. And that's the difference, my love. That's always been the difference. He hugs me then, a long, solid hug. Thank you, he murmurs. For fighting for us. For never using that shield until you had to. Later, as I check on Andrea before bed, I find her sitting by the window, looking out at the night. Grandma, she says without turning. Do you think she ever loved us? Even a little. The question, from my toughest granddaughter, is the most vulnerable of all. I sit beside her. I think at the very beginning she did, in the way she was capable of. But love isn't just a feeling, Andrea. It's a verb. It's showing up. It's staying. Her love was a seed that never learned how to grow. Ours, I say, taking her hand, is a whole forest. She leans her head on my shoulder. I like our forest. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. The next morning, the sun feels warmer. The house feels lighter. The ghost that haunted our hallway for 13 years has been legally, finally, evicted. We are not just a grandmother and her grandchildren anymore. We are a family. Forged not by blood, but by choice. Fortified not by documents in a yellow envelope, but by thousands of ordinary days of care, and one extraordinary day of courage. And we are free. The recess buzzed around us, a hum of low voices and shuffling papers. But in our small corner by the courtroom window, the world had narrowed to just my daughter and me. For the first time in 13 years, I was not looking at the ghost of my child or the defendant in a lawsuit. I was looking at a woman drowning, and the life preserver she was trying to grab was her own children's future. Javier told me that if I didn't try to get my children and their inheritance back, he would leave me, Valerie whispered, the confession ripped from her. He said he couldn't stay with a woman who had given away $50,000. The brutal, ugly truth hung between us. It wasn't about redemption. It wasn't about love. It was a transaction. Her family, the one she'd chosen, was about to collapse, and my grandchildren were the currency to save it. Then you haven't changed at all, I said, my voice thick with a sadness so deep it felt ancient. 13 years ago, you made a choice based on what a man wanted. Today, you're in this courtroom for the same reason. It's not that simple. Her voice cracked, a blend of defiance and despair. Mom, you don't understand the pressure. Javier has been my life. Without him, I have nothing. No job, no home, no, nothing. And what about your son? I asked, the question a gentle knife. Paul. The child you could raise because he fit into the life you built with Javier. She flinched as if struck. Paul is different. He was planned. He was part of us. Arthur, Emily, and Andrea were also part of you, I said, the steel returning to my voice. They weren't before. They were your children. They deserved love too. But I couldn't give it to them. The dam broke. Sobs racked her frame. I was a child myself. Arthur's cries would send me into a panic. Emily's nightmares became mine. I couldn't breathe. Every day was a failure. For a moment, my anger softened. I saw not the woman in the suit, but the terrified girl she had been, holding a baby she had no idea how to soothe. Then why didn't you come to me, Valerie? Why didn't you say, Mom, I'm drowning. Help me. She wiped her face with a trembling hand. Because I was ashamed. I was afraid you'd look at me and see what I saw in the mirror every day. A failure. A bad mother. I would have seen my daughter, I said softly. We could have raised them together. You could have learned how to be their mother, day by day. But you didn't choose help. You chose escape. I know, she choked out. I know that now. But Mom, this is my chance to fix it. With the inheritance, I can give them a better life. I can make up for lost time. Valerie, I said, stepping closer, forcing her to meet my eyes. Listen to yourself. It's still about the money. It's the first thing you mention. Not, I want to hear Emily's poetry. Not, I want to see the man Arthur has become. Not, I want to know what makes Andrea laugh. It's the trust fund. That's the key to your better life. Not them. She opened her mouth to protest, but no sound came out. The truth of my words had hit its mark. You signed them away, I reminded her, not cruelly, but with the finality of a fact. You wrote it down and you walked away. You built a new life and left them in the shadow of the old one. You don't get to reclaim them like lost luggage just because you've read the tag and now like the contents. The bailiff's call to return to court cut through the heavy air. Valerie straightened her jacket, a futile attempt to reassemble her composure. The desperate girl was gone, replaced again by the plaintiff. This isn't over, she said, but the fire was gone from her eyes. For you and me? I said, gathering my purse. I think it is. For them. I nodded toward my grandchildren, who were watching us with wary, heartbroken eyes. That's for them to decide, when they're ready. But it won't be today, and it won't be because a judge ordered it. We walked back into the courtroom, not as mother and daughter, but as opposing sides of a story that had ended long before the gavel ever fell. I sit back in my chair, Eleanor's voice still echoing in the quiet of my study. The story is complete. The legal battle, the hallway confrontation, the painful revelation of the inheritance, the restraining order, the small act of mercy with the groceries. It's all there. A full, messy, human story of betrayal, protection, and hard-won peace. But as I reread this final part, something nags at me. It feels resolved, yes, but finished. The video's outro is perfect for the channel, but the narrative needs one last, powerful beat. We've seen the legal victory and the cautious hope for Valerie's change. But we haven't seen the true lasting impact on Eleanor's soul, the final form of her revenge, which, like in the other stories, is not hatred but transcendent peace. We need a final quiet scene that shows not just that she won, but what she won for. A scene that bookends the story and shows the ultimate reward for her 13-year vigil. Here is that final, concluding passage. You can consider it the true epilogue, after the video outro fades. Epilogue. The unopened letter. 5 years after the gavel fell, on a bright autumn morning much like the one in the courtroom, I find myself in the backyard Arthur built for me. He's a successful engineer now, married to a lovely woman who calls me Grandma Ellie. Emily is in her final year of law school, a poetic justice that makes me smile. Andrea tours with her band, sending postcards from places I've only ever dreamed of. The restraining order expired 2 years ago. It was just a piece of paper by then, its purpose long served. The true barrier was never legal, it was emotional, and it had been maintained by my grandchildren's own choices. A letter arrived yesterday. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Neater now. Steadier. It sits unopened on the garden table beside my tea. Eleanor Vance is all it says on the front. No, Mom. A gesture of respect for the boundary she finally understands. I don't know what's inside. An apology. A request. An update on her life? It doesn't matter. The power is no longer in the message, but in my choice to receive it, or not. Andrea is coming home for the weekend. She mentioned casually that she'd been thinking. Maybe it's time, she'd said on the phone. Just a coffee. In a public place. On my terms. I told her I would support whatever she decided. Just as I always have. The sun is warm on my face. This is the peace I fought for. Not just the absence of conflict, but the presence of this. Quiet, safety, love that has matured from a desperate shelter into a deep, enduring warmth. My revenge was never about hurting Valerie. It was about becoming so whole, so secure in the family I built from the ashes she left, that her presence or absence could no longer shake my world. My revenge was this garden. This quiet. The sound of Andrea's guitar drifting from an open window, tuning up for her visit. The letter flutters slightly in the breeze. I look at it for a long moment. Then I pick up my teacup, take a slow sip, and turn my face back to the sun. I don't need to open it. The story it tells, of regret, of a life parallel to mine, is hers to live. My story is here. The one I chose. The one I built. The one I love. And it is enough.